as little as 50 years ago, we didn't have our own families. We couldn't be our true selves. And so this is really a dramatic change in dynamic. I mean, the ability for two men to become parents with the use of an egg donor is just, so transformational for our community, where, your how you identify your sexuality has no implication on your desire to be a parent. So for all you dads to be and moms to be out there who are members of my community, the LGBTQ plus community, taking that step to be a parent is like, there's a whole community of people out there, Lisa and myself included, who are really committed to helping you make the right decisions for your family to be.
Welcome to Donor Conception Conversations. This is the one podcast created exclusively for people who are planning to use donor conception to have their children, or for people who have already used donor conception to have their children. I'm Lisa Schumann, and I'm your host of this podcast. I'm a researcher, an author, and a therapist who's passionate about donor conception. And I'm here to teach you the tools and the truths that you need to have a better journey to parenthood. And today, I'm very lucky to have Dr. Mark Leondires on the show, who is my co-author of this book that we will tell you a lot more about as we move into the fall and it comes out, and also who I worked with for almost a decade at Gay Parents to Be and Illume Fertility. So Dr. Leondires is the founder, medical director, and partner of reproductive endocrinology at Illume Fertility and Gay Parents to Be. He's a board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility. He currently serves as a member of the Resolves Physician Council and member of ASRM's Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Task Force. He also is a past president of ASRM's LGBTQ Special Interest Group. He's been selected by Castle Connolly's top doctor in Connecticut and New York for many consecutive years. For Dr. Leondires, medicine offers an opportunity to solve problems such as fertility patient issues and puzzles like that. This, combined with a wide range of interests and life events, is how Dr. Leondires came into reproductive endocrinology and infertility and started his own fertility practice and also built his family. So welcome, Dr. Leondires. It's good to see you, as always.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's really an honor or a privilege to be here. I'm very excited to be here today and excited to have this conversation about many things that go into becoming a father.
Well, I'm really excited to see you as always, but also today because today is Father's Day and Father's Day during Pride. So this is a bonus episode, and I'm thrilled to have you as our expert talk about all the things that people need to know for gay family building, but also for straight family building. Since we're at it, we may as well discuss the whole gamut of how that works. And I think the audience would really be interested in us understanding what happens when people come to your office. Why don't we just start with the straight couples? Somebody comes into your office and they say, we have infertility problems. What are the first steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for over 25 years, I've been seeing infertile couples. And I think it's important just to process that nobody really ever wants to come to the fertility doctor. But we are here to help you. And we actually have a lot of tools in our toolbox to help you. So when someone comes to our office and they're in an opposite sex relationship, we have to kind of define the reason. And it's really quite surprising to recognize that 30 to 40% of subfertility or difficulty getting pregnant are actually male factor problems. And within that, there's actually a very small fraction of dads to be who actually just don't have any sperm, or maybe there's medical issues in their background that might lead them to want to use donated gametes, specifically donated sperm, or perhaps they're in an age group that we're aware in medicine that there might be more negative risks potentially passed on to their child to be, and they're going to choose to use donated gametes. So when somebody first comes to our office, it's let's examine the female component and let's examine the male component. And the male component examination is pretty straightforward, meaning it's going to require a semen analysis, or maybe you come to the table knowing that you're going to want to use a alternative sperm source because of your family history. And that might be something like mental illness, schizophrenia, and things like that. Or it might be something that's a genetic condition that you know could be passed on to your child that you just want to avoid. So working out those details within the couple are something that we're trained to do as reproductive endocrinologists. And what we also have to talk about is everybody comes to our office with a little bit of maybe grief or heavy heart that they need the help. And that's where, let's say, folks like you come in to try to support people through that relationship.
And that can be so heartbreaking because when you're in a situation where you can't use your gametes, people probably come to see you and say, this is really hard, but we're ready to move forward in spite of that. And we're ready to use donor sperm and donor eggs. And so once they get to that place, why don't we start with the donor sperm? What do patients usually go through?
For people who need to use donor sperm, dads to be that need to use donor sperm, they are often looking for somebody that might be of the same ethnic group as they are, perhaps certain what we call in medicine phenotypic features, how they look. But then, from my seat, I'm always trying to stress that somebody's family history, their family genetics are actually much more important than what they look like. Right? We're all a representation of the past 5 or 6 generations of our maternal side and paternal side. And processing the fact that looking for somebody who's going to be the genetic component for your child to be is something that really, opens up somebody's perspective maybe on who they are. I sometimes will ask somebody who's working hard to find a donor, and this goes across whether you're looking for a sperm donor, an egg donor. If you look at your own family tree, there's going to be things within it that you might not have even chosen for yourself, right? And then if you look even amongst your sibling group, sometimes you'll notice that siblings can be very different, even though they have the same genetic parents. So it's really fascinating to think of in reproductive medicine. We understand that there's 46 chromosomes, but those carry 52,000 genes. And there's a lot of genes that kind of interact that go into who we are. And on a very basic level, what we want for our children first is health, right? And that health has a lot to do with their family tree. And it has a lot to do with the mental health of the donor that you choose as well, because there's a lot of information on that. And those are things that we can't really always define as a single genetic issue. It's really a combination of environment and genetics. So when somebody comes in looking for a sperm donor, I think we have to kind of be practical and leapfrog over that grief and then think about what's important to them and sometimes refocus on what they should be looking at. And it's incredibly hard. And it's always been really frustrating to me when somebody comes in, whether they need a sperm donor or an egg donor, that some folks really are like, oh, well, you just need to find a donor, right? But that perspective is really not helpful. I mean, as a dad through egg donation myself, it's a lot of stress and work to look for a donor. As a father to be who, let's say, needs to find a sperm source because of their own medical considerations or perhaps their medical issues, that's got to be very, very hard. And acknowledging that, I think, is important. If I could just flip the conversation a little bit, if it's your partner, your female partner that needs an egg donor, one of the things that I've seen that the male partners often do is they leave it up to them. And what I know from years of doing this as well is that your partner really wants your opinion. And they don't want to bear the whole responsibility of finding the egg donor. Right? So whether you're looking for a sperm donor because of your own issue, or whether your partner's looking for an egg donor because of their issue, this is something you're going to do together. And I also have seen over the years, there's sometimes a situation where some person's the seeker and some person's the approver. And that always creates extra tension because you can always find something wrong. So my thought process when you go through this is spend time with your mental health professional, spend time understanding what medical issues come into play, and then sit down, and it might be 3 or 4 weekends in a row, but come to some consensus together.
That's great advice. That's wonderful. And then what about the medical side of it? How do we know if we're getting healthy eggs or sperm?
That's a multi-layered question that's not easy to answer. But how do we know we're getting healthy eggs is probably a little bit easier than how we know we're getting healthy sperm. But since eggs are probably 80 to 90% responsible for a healthy pregnancy and child to be, it's really quite complex. So on the male side, when we look at healthy sperm, we're really looking at a single cell organism that has compacted DNA, and we're looking at the shape of the sperm, the motility of the sperm, and then we look at the health of the sperm source as a representative of that little packet of DNA. So I think of a sperm as almost like the flash drive to the supercomputer. In fact, sometimes I tell my patients, think about that's the car key to the Maserati, right? You can't go anywhere without the car key, but it's necessary material. While we'd like to be able to pick the healthiest sperm, we can't. We actually take the semen analysis. We will find the moving, normally shaped sperm if we're in the IVF laboratory and we're going to do, inject one sperm into one egg. And we're just picking the best morphologically or shaped or looking sperm that's moving to inject into the egg. Now, if somebody's doing, insemination, right? So you've got a healthy sperm source that's checked all the boxes, mental health, genetics, their own family tree, and so on. And then you've got, 5 million sperm that you're putting into the female reproductive tract. And, there's this kind of, excuse the show and tell, but this concept of you got to go through the cervix, through the uterus, and half the sperm go the wrong way because they don't ask directions, right? That's a bad male factor infertility joke, right?
That's great.
And then it takes about 50 to 100,000 sperm to fertilize an egg because they have to make it through the defenses of the egg. And then one sperm that we didn't pick, you didn't pick, nobody picked, just randomly got to the right place at the right time. And then that egg, once the sperm membrane hits, actually activates a little bit of a force field or a calcium channel blockade that blocks every other sperm from getting in. But that sperm that got in is random, right? And that's part of the diversity in our human family, right? All across the globe, there's 8 billion of us, I think now, and none of us are the same. So assessing sperm quality and function is very difficult, even though it's only a single cell. Now we can certainly say what sperm don't do well, right? We have immotile sperm that don't do well. We have immature sperm that don't do well. But if you're using a sperm from a donor, you're not going to have those situations. There's going to be, healthy sperm and healthy background to look at.
The sperm is already screened at the sperm bank.
Yeah, correct. Because the sperm is already screened for the sperm. As far as healthy eggs, that's also a fascinating issue. So, the male reproductive system is always making new sperm, minute by minute, month by minute. And for women, they've made all their eggs actually by the time they're only 5 months in utero. So in the uterus of their mother, right? And then it's a decline. And it's an inexorable decline as you move towards menopause. And, one of the things that's fascinating about reproductive endocrinology, so that women have really 5 distinct hormonal parts to their life, right? And only part of it is reproduction. So after you get done with puberty, women are fertile. And then they transition sometime between, 42 to 45 to being, not infertile in that kind of what we call perimenopausal period. But we also know that the quality of the eggs that have been in storage or hibernation since, let's say, the age of 12 or 13 starts to really decline significantly at 35 and more significantly over 40. So egg quality is a representation probably of a woman's ability or a person's ability to keep those eggs basically appropriately stored and not harmed by the environment at all without breaking down. And I think that I'm still fascinated by the fact by what an egg does through the process of fertilization and making an embryo. And perhaps we should talk about that more now or switch to another topic.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's great. That's a great segue. So how does the embryo develop? And once you've done that, you've put the sperm and the egg together, it's going to be, if in IVF anyway, you're going to have it in the lab, right? And so how does that develop, and how do you choose the right embryo for the family?
I have 46 chromosomes. You have 46 chromosomes. Pretty much everybody on this Zoom has 46 chromosomes, but a sperm has 23 chromosomes. And that's the male development process. But a human egg in storage in the ovary still has 46 chromosomes. It's actually frozen in the middle of something called meiosis 1. And with ovulation, it wakes up, pulls apart chromosomes, duplicates chromosomes, and waits for the sperm to hit. And at that point in time, it's called a meiosis 2 egg. And then that egg that's been in storage maybe for 30 years has to unpack the male chromosomes, complete another division. So it goes down to 23. So now the 23 chromosome egg and the 23 chromosome sperm, the egg matches up all 23 chromosomes, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, all along this kind of like plate within the egg itself. And then the next day, fascinatingly enough, we can see a single cell embryo that has 2 pronuclei. It's called a 2 pronuclei embryo, and that's the sperm nucleus and the egg nucleus. And that's the only time in your life you'll have a 2 nuclei cell that's healthy. And within a matter of 24 hours, that 1 cell zygote becomes a 2 cell, 4 cell, 8 cell, 16, 32, 64, 128 embryo. And that's what we watch in the laboratory. So how we evaluate embryo quality is completing fertilization, staying on a pretty strict division curve, and eventually making an embryo that's called the blastocyst, which is an embryo that is no longer just 8 to 12 cells, but it actually has gone through a process where the cells that are going to become the baby or the fetus have been defined by a process we don't understand. And the cells that are going to become the placenta are also defined. And those placenta cells start pulling in fluid from the outside, and they puff out this embryo, and it becomes what's called a blastocyst, and eventually it breaks out of its shell. So all of us on this podcast, broke out of a shell. And we have the ability to just look at that embryo to see it went through all those processes. And we do have the ability now to biopsy an embryo to see if it has the right amount of chromosomes. We even have the ability to biopsy embryos if you're a carrier of a certain genetic disease, just to make sure we're transferring an embryo that maybe doesn't carry, let's say, a disease-causing mutation or a cancer-related risk gene. As you can see, I'm really passionate to talk about this. It's like an amazing process that we go through every day. And, for a lot of people who are choosing to use donated eggs, they're coming to this table because their eggs aren't working well anymore, right? And that might be something that they were kind of born with, or that may be secondary to what we call reproductive aging. So they might be in that, age group where they no longer have a healthy egg pool. But what's, remarkable is that, once you find the right donor for you and your partner, you can still become a parent through egg donation. And if you need a sperm source, you can become a parent through sperm donation. So for opposite sex couples, typically you're using the biology of one of the intended parents, and you're using donated gametes from the other intended parents. And when you're in that process of making that decision, it seems otherworldly. And I do think it's, really, really difficult. But there's going to be a point in time that, you're going to be holding your child in your arms, and that's all going to go away. It's really quite amazing as humans how we have the ability to move beyond grief and move forward, hopefully together, and move forward with hope as we raise our family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as usual, that was so beautifully said and incredible. I think our guests are so lucky to hear this beautiful description. It's wonderful. What about, since we're also talking about pride, what is different for a gay couple if you have lesbian partners or two male partners who are going through the same thing. They still have to pick the sperm and the egg, and they're watching this process of the embryo develop in the lab in the same way, but there are differences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, every couple has their own unique pathway. But I think if you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community and you need donor gametes, maybe you don't come to it from the same spot of grief. You come to it like, oh, heck, there's people out there that can help us have a baby, right? And maybe more excited to find who this donor is going to be. And also anxious to know who this donor is. Because if you're, as I am, a member of a two-dad family, or if you're going to be a two-mom family, or if you're a single parent to be, you're going to share with your child information about that donor. And in fact, you and I believe that every family that uses donated gametes should be prepared to share with their child for the benefit of their child. But I think what's unique to the LGBTQ plus community as we go forward with donor conception is we embrace it a little bit more, because we're so excited to even be able to have a family, right? So back and I think it was around 2005, it was the cover of the New York Times. It was surrogacy and IVF for two dads to be, right? And since the passage of gay marriage and so on, there's kind of been a baby boom within the gay male community, and same-sex female couples have been moving forward with conception through donor insemination for years, but they are now also using, in vitro fertilization, either to create embryos to place in their partner's uterus, or maybe they've reproductively aged and they need help, or maybe they have blocked tubes. So within the LGBTQ plus community, in vitro fertilization is really a really powerful tool to help us conceive, and understanding that our view on using a donor is a little bit different, because, as little as 50 years ago, we didn't have our own families. We couldn't be our true selves. And so this is really a dramatic change in dynamic. I mean, the ability for two men to become parents with the use of an egg donor is just, so transformational for our community, where, your how you identify your sexuality has no implication on your desire to be a parent. So for all you dads to be and moms to be out there who are members of my community, the LGBTQ plus community, taking that step to be a parent is like, it's a big step, and it's a lot of intention. It's a lot of resources, but it's something that's really in your heart. And there's a whole community of people out there, Lisa and myself included, who are really committed to helping you make the right decisions for your family to be. Understanding, by the way, to have children is to embrace a future of which you have no control. You just don't know what you're going to get. You do have the ability, though, to make decisions, right? So anybody using donated gametes, straight or gay, has the ability to screen those gametes for genes that cause disease, screen that person for mental illness, looks at their family history, and get a good impression of the likelihood for success, either by using a sperm source that perhaps has been successful in the past, or using an egg source that's younger, that has a very high likelihood to make a successful embryo that can make a baby someday.
That's great. So what's different? Let's start with, gay dads to be. They want to use a donor. Are they looking for different things than, let's say, a straight couple would look for when they choose a donor?
A lot of gay couples are looking for a donor that's somewhere of a melange between the two of them. And that's different than if you're a straight couple and you're just looking to, quote unquote, find somebody like one of you. And that might be easy. Maybe both people are of a Northern European ancestry and they want to use a Northern European donor. It might be hard. Maybe it's a bi-ethnic couple where one person is, Asian and the other person is Caucasian, or an African American ancestry and a Chinese descent person. So that can become more and more challenging. And in those situations there, that decision is really personalized. I have a couple recently who they're both Caucasian and they wanted a child that was more like a child of the world. So they wanted to use a Hispanic donor because they just see the explosion of this Latin culture within our culture. They wanted to share that with them. So you have the ability to kind of make that choice. I think that there are some things that are just in our heart, though. Sometimes we'll encounter a dad-to-be who's really passionate about their ethnicity, whether it be, Polish or Jewish or, Brazilian or whatever. And then, they're going to seek to find a donor that has part of that in them because they also want, and this is like a hard concept, right? So if it's a 2-dad couple and they're going to have 2 kids from both of their genetics, the dad that's really passionate about their ethnicity is obviously going to pass that on to that egg and that child to be. But the dad that doesn't have that isn't going to pass it on. So the only way to accomplish that is to find a donor that has that in common. And to find some of these donors that kind of make people feel good in their heart about finding a donor is beyond the medicine or the science of finding the right egg donor. It really becomes like a decision of the heart, and it has to feel good. And I think that one of the things that I stress when people look for sperm donor and egg donor across the whole gamut of assisted reproduction is look at the profile and recognize that your child's going to be reading that profile, maybe 5 times, maybe 100 times, and make sure there's some things in there that speak to them and who they're going to become. So I think, it's incredibly hard to find a donor, and unique within the LGBTQ plus community, we have the ability to make all these decisions, but there's also the burden of making all these decisions. And I'd like to relieve you all of this burden. You don't have that much control. You kind of get what you get, and you'll love what you receive.
Now, what about ovarian reserve? That's different, right? For a gay male couple, they have to be a little bit more serious about that, right?
There are some 25-year-old egg donors that we get 10 to 15 eggs from, and there are some 25-year-old egg donors that we get 20 to 30 eggs from. So if you're a 2-dad-to-be couple where you both want to be genetic fathers, you really want to use one egg donor once and be able to split the pool and have enough embryos for both of you, right? So that being said, you're going to lean towards using the donor that has the ability to give us 20 to 30 eggs. Because what most people on this podcast probably don't appreciate, but I'll point it out to you, is that if you plant 20 tomato seeds, you'll be lucky to get 1 or 2 tomato plants that give you fruit, right? So if I get 30 eggs, I might get 26 mature eggs, and then I might get 20 fertilized eggs. And then let's say I split those between 2 dads. So now I have 10 and 10. I might end up with 5 blastocysts and only 2 or 3 normals out of the group. So from that starting 30, you might be down to 5 or 6, right? And if you start from lower, that triangle is going to be a little bit steeper. So I always encourage my dad-to-be couples where they both want to be bio-dads to look at ovarian reserve in their donor. And we can do that in reproductive medicine by looking at the ovaries themselves. Because when you look at a woman's ovaries, that you can see how many small follicles there are. And that's a representative of their ovarian reserve. When you look at somebody blood work, you can actually look at a hormone that's secreted by those immature eggs called anti-Mullerian hormone level. And we can actually gauge an estimate of how many eggs we're going to get by how high that number is going to be. So anti-Mullerian hormone levels, age, plus basal antral follicle count are a way to assess somebody who was assigned female at birth, their ovarian reserve, right? So if you're in a 2-dad-to-be couple and one of you is going to be a sperm source, you can pretty much use any egg donor you want that passes all the other screening. But if you're in a 2-dad-to-be couple and you both want to be biodads, you're only going to have access to about 50% of the donor pool, because only 50% of, let's say, 25-year-olds are going to give you 20 plus eggs to work through. And it's always challenging, right? Of course, people usually seem to always find the person that we don't recommend that they go through, right? Yes. with. That doesn't mean you don't, right? Sometimes, you have to follow your heart, and there can be times where you only got 15 eggs, but we got beautiful embryos and enough for both of you to become dads. And that's where the counseling comes in. And that's where, whatever fertility clinic you're working through as a parent to be, you want to make sure you have a good relationship with your doctor, the nurses, the whole team, mental health professionals, and everybody, because it does take a village for you to have your family. And that village has to be somebody that speaks to you.
Yes, absolutely. And with regard to lesbian couples, they're kind of in the same boat. If they both want to be genetic parents, they need to have all that extra sperm also. So they need to think about that before the donor retires or before they just move along, right?
Absolutely. So lesbian couples where they both want to be biologically related to children, but they're going to use both of their eggs. They're going to choose a sperm source that maybe is in between the two of them as well. They're going to face all the same decisions. It's interesting, and we've even presented this in our research, right? That
yes,
there's different perspectives on the importance of the genetics of the gametes versus who's carrying the baby as well. Everybody feels differently. So with your partner, sometimes somebody's not that interested in using their genetics. They really might want to carry the baby, right? And even in male couples, I have some male couples where one dad is like, listen, I'm not so interested in using my gametes. And it's thrilled to just use your gametes because I love you, right? And therefore, it's going to be easier to find a donor. And then, in some of these bi-ethnic couples, sometimes it's in the United States, one of the few places you can do this stuff, right? It's a lot easier to find a Caucasian donor. So sometimes we'll just use the sperm from the more diverse or harder to find ethnic group and find a Caucasian donor that's like the dad who's Caucasian, right? So there's all kinds of different ways to spin this Rubik's cube, and when you solve the cube and you get all the colors lined up, then it's just a success.
It's so wonderful to be able to have you and to be able to have modern medicine to help everyone along and build the family that they want to have. I have one other question. With regard to men who are older meaning, in their 60s, as they pursue fertility treatment, whether there are two dads, whether there's a dad and a mom, or if there's a known donor, any of those cases, how do you feel about counseling patients about when to kind of draw that line? Do you use a sperm donor? Do you not use a sperm donor?
Yeah, I think that reproductive aging does affect men as well. We already talked about that reproductive aging really dramatically affects women over the age of 45, really starts to really affect things over age 40. But for men, the cut point is probably 50 to 60, where we talked about the testes is always making new sperm. It just gets not as efficient anymore. So the sperm quality tends to go down, and the risk of having a child with some defined abnormalities such as dwarfism or schizophrenia, those things start to go up. So in our practice at Illume Fertility, any man over 50, we recommend does advanced paternal age counseling. And what will happen is you'll speak to a genetic counselor and then they'll give you relative risk. So based on your age, here's your chances of having a child with this disease process if you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and so on. And I think that, it could be a really selfless act to, give up your desire to use your own genetics for the benefit of your child having a lower risk for some of these diseases that is related to your age. And it's not something that we can screen for at the level of the embryo. It becomes a very personal decision. And, we have to keep this in perspective, right? So it might bring the risk from 0.5% to 3%, right? Which means there's still a 97% chance that they're going to have a child without one of these age-related issues for male reproduction. But I think it's incumbent on the reproductive medicine group to educate you on those questions, because really what you want is you want to raise a healthy child, and you have this opportunity to take these steps to use the healthiest sperm source or egg source as you move forward.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way for us to end our conversation just for today, because we're going to come back in the fall or a little bit before to talk about our book. But for today, happy Father's Day to everybody out there. And thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Leondires, is there anything that you'd like to say or ways that people can reach out to you?
For sure. So anybody who wants to become a parent, specifically wants to become a father, that door is open for you to step through it. We use the term journey. Sometimes it's a trek. But one of the things that I can tell you personally is that, I went from being a doctor, I'm gay, so I had to struggle with that for myself. But once I became a parent, I just became more like, I guess, everybody else that's a parent, right? And a lot of the things that we used to worry about become different, because now you're worrying about other things. So if you want to become a parent, we are here to help you. You can reach me certainly at illumefertility.com or gayparents2be.com. And if you just need, some advice, through Gay Parents to Be, I've done, chats with people all over the world on how to get started. And sometimes all you need to know is how to get started and perhaps where to go. And so I just want to applaud everybody who's considering being a parent and understand that we acknowledge that it's hard, but we also are here to help you. And I wish you the best of luck as you move forward, and happy Father's Day to everybody.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope whatever you're doing for Father's Day, you're having a good kind of Parents' Day. Dr. Leondires and I both are voting to change it to Parents' Day today, actually. So whatever you're doing today, we hope you're having a wonderful day. And thank you so much again for joining. And please subscribe. That's how we keep going. And you'll hear about all of our new episodes. Thanks very much. And I'll see you next time.
We started it, we had a couple of friends who had gone down the lesbian baby making route. So we had somewhat of a blueprint. And so we knew we were going to use a sperm donor, and we just didn't know if it was going to be a known donor or a sperm bank donor. That's another story. But anyway, back to the point. My wife said,